Okay, I'm going to get us started for our next panel session. This is how universal design for learning can inform human-centered design in learning analytics. And we have 4 panelists today, 2 who are with us in person and 2 who are with us virtually. We'll do a few introductions and then we will get started giving each of the panelists a few minutes to give their initial thoughts on this topic. So I'll just say I'm a postdoctoral researcher. My name is Catherine Manley. I'm a postdoc at the City University of New York and a professor practice at Bay Path University. And I'm interested in how flexibility in design and delivery of educational experiences can help improve student success. And so I had an interest in this panel, organizing this. So our first panelist is Angela Stewart, who is joining us online. She's an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the US. She conducts research at the intersection of the learning sciences, artificial intelligence, and human-computer interaction with an interest in learning technologies for justice and equity. Kalisa, who's here with us in person, is a member of the SOLAR Executive Committee and a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Oslo in Norway. He is interested in human-centered design and inclusion issues in learning analytics. Adele Smolansky is joining us from the airport today, so we hope this works for her. She is a senior undergraduate computer science major at Cornell University in the US, who is interested in understanding how EdTech can support students with disabilities. She plans for her future PhD research that she will focus on the intersection of education, computer science, and neuroscience to increase our scientific understanding of how children learn and how educational technology can improve student learning outcomes. Finally, Roberto Martinez-Maldonado is a senior lecturer at Monash University, and he's here with us today in person, from Australia, who has experience studying human-centered design and co-design with a particular current interest in learning and teamwork analytics, including making key multimodal activity traces visible and available for computational analysis. And I just wanted to put one slide up for those who are not familiar with universal design, because I know this is not necessarily common knowledge in this group. I just thought I would present that universal design for learning posits that students will benefit in their curricular and co-curricular experiences when we design those experiences by providing multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation of materials or what the students interact with, and multiple means of action and expression for students to demonstrate their learning. So that's what we're talking about today, and I would like to turn things over first to give each of our panelists a few minutes to speak, and we will switch to the Zoom for Angela to speak first.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Kathy, so much for that introduction. So I am Angela. I am an assistant professor in the School of Computing and Information at the University of Pittsburgh and a research scientist with the Learning Research and Development Center. So today, I want you all to consider the last time that you felt agency with an educational technology. So to have agency means to intentionally produce an outcome as a result of your actions. And tools such as educational technologies can extend a person's capacity to behave agentically. Agency matters because not only is it crucial for learning and engagement, but a sense of agency over one's life and learning should be a desired outcome for learning environments in and of itself. As many of us are experts in technology and computation, we likely feel a lot of agency with educational technologies and that we're able to use and repurpose or create technologies that further our own goals. So now consider what agency do the people using your systems feel, namely educators and learners. Think about typical learning analytics systems such as dashboards, intelligent tutoring systems, or adaptive MOOCs. Often, these are designed, implemented, deployed, and evaluated by researchers like us. We're deciding what to focus on in the creation of these systems, and we're also defining what it means for these systems to be successful. But this paradigm can leave out the agency of educators and learners, their agency to have a say in what technologies are created for the classrooms, their agency to define when a technology is successful in their classrooms, and their agency to flexibly shape a technology if it's not serving their goals. So you might be thinking, what are some ways that we might center the agency of learners and educators? We might engage them in co-design processes, ensuring that their voices are integral to the conception, creation, and evaluation of new learning analytics tools. We might conduct qualitative studies that allow for a more nuanced understanding of our tools and how they support teacher and learner agency. And we might have teacher and learner oversight of our learning analytics tools, where we as a community are continuously accountable to those that we support. So as we have this discussion today about universal design for learning, I challenge you all to consider the question, how am I centering in my own work the agency of learners and teachers? Looking forward to having this chat with you all.
Now go to Rogers here, and I'm going to bring the microphone over here. And we should have the second microphone for the room. You're speaking into both.
All right, thank you so much, Kathy, first of all, for this opportunity to be part of this panel on universal design for learning. And I think first in my interest in this panel, first of all, came as a result of the fact that during my PhD, I was working on how we develop learning analytics tools that are embedded within the interest of the stakeholders we are working with. And getting into the aspects of universal design for learning and just also talking about the topics that have been discussed in the previous panel, we see if we are to create impact or if we are to have learning analytics as a field that is going to be addressing the needs of our stakeholders and in particular the marginalized groups of people, the question is how do we design and how do we prepare our learning analytics tools and also the interventions that we come up with in a way that they can actually address the needs of the stakeholders that we intend to address or that we intend to actually help. In this case, just like we are going to be discussing, the question is, we are talking about the multimodal approaches that we take in learning analytics. How do we make sure that we work with the principles of design, rather universal design, to have presentations of learning analytics that are actually addressing or that are compatible to the needs of the different stakeholders? How do we even make sure that the learning analytics that we produce are personalized based on the needs and the interests and of the different people that we are trying to help or that we are trying to support in the learning process? I'll touch during my discussion about aspects, for example, of the Sustainable Development Goals. We look at Sustainable Development Goals like reducing inequality and increasing education quality. And if we talk about marginalized groups or the areas where education is still a challenge, how do we use learning analytics as a tool to actually support and reach all the wider audience? For example, looking at areas which are still struggling to have enough people within the education system. Is learning analytics something? Does it have a place in this debate? Can we actually design tools for learning analytics so in a way that they can actually, instead of enforcing or reinforcing the existing inequalities in different regions of the world, can we actually use it as a tool to actually support or help in actually picking out those people who have been left behind, but also in a way that they get the support? If we are developing the models, can we develop them in a way that can actually just support them in being included in the different learning kind of environment? So based on my experience, of course, from my work with the teachers and designing tools for stakeholders, I think I'll be drawing experiences and sharing with all of you how can we actually design, how can we make sure that when we are designing our learning analytics tools, they're actually compatible and they're addressing the needs of the different stakeholders. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
So we will go now to Adele online.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Adele Smolansky, and I'm a senior studying computer science at Cornell, and I will be going on to do my PhD in education and technology. I'm really focused on improving educational opportunities for children with disabilities. That's been my background, and that's really what I'm here today to talk about. I got into this research space actually through my own startup, an industry where I was working on an educational technology platform specifically tailored for students with severe cognitive, behavioral, and physical disabilities. And through this experience, I tried to understand what is there in academic literature and in just public knowledge about creating educational tools to support children with disabilities. And I found that there was very little information about it. And one thing that I did find was UDL. Universal Design of Learning is an incredible starting spot, and I'm really excited to talk about how I was able to apply that in my own work. But I also am here to talk about the limitations of UDL. UDL is about universal design of learning. It can support millions of people, and it's really used for all users. However, we do have to consider specifically the needs of students with disabilities and the very complex individual needs that these students have. So for example, students with physical disabilities may use something called assistive technology. So we need to see how we can design educational technology to support students with these physical needs. And through this research and through my work, I really found that by thinking about the individual needs of each individual student with a disability, we can actually support many other students that don't have disabilities and just are struggling with learning, or that just want a little bit of extra support. Sometimes I also would like extra support in my classes when I'm taking a math course, and thinking specifically about the ways in which I learn, the way that I learn best on one day versus another could really be impactful. And that's why I'm really excited to talk about how we can use UDL for this purpose, but then how we can also use UDL to keep progressing and get even further and really consider more of that individual aspect for each student.
I'm now going to turn it over to Roberto in the room.
Yes, please. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So, yeah, I would like to make a disclosure of where I'm coming from when I'm going to respond to some of the questions in the panel. I got lots of inspiration from the questions that Kathy sent to us, and I immediately thought about this picture that I saw once, and I got in love of it. It shows a Mayan Halachmunik. He's like a king and like a robot, and it's the representation of the AI serving to the whatever is needed by this king. And I felt a connection because some of my ancestors come from this region as well, from the Mayan region. But the message that it portrays, at least to me, is that if we want to design AI with integrity, this is what we are aiming for, remembering who is the receiver and who is the provider of some service, some kind of help. And a key word that came to my mind to start to stick together human-centered design, universal design for learning as a framework, and also the aim of equity was this term of worldviews, which is acknowledging that each of us have a different worldview, and that is going to define how we interact with everything and how we design things. Can you go to the next slide, please? And talking about designing things, when we design for people, we have a systemic challenge. Not one, many. This is just one example when we have men who we don't have a clue of what a woman involves, what being a woman is. We make decisions, and this is just one of other examples. We do the same when we design learning analytics for students, because maybe we were students before, but we don't know what it is to be a student right now. Or when we design analytics to be deployed in other environments that we don't have much clue about what it involves to be in there and being a user. And other keywords that are used in the questions that we're going to be presented in a minute involve, as my colleague Roger is also mentioned, inequality And I really like these figures because it shows easily how to identify what is inequality, what is equality, which equality doesn't solve many problems related to fairness. When we have equity, we start to address the actual problems, but when we really need to get to the point of justice, and if any of you were in LAC conference last year, justice was one of the key terms, and one of the keynote speakers was talking about justice. So I just would like to also point at the detail in these figures that illustrate these concepts, that what makes a difference in each of these examples is that someone is designing some solution, someone is adding things to improve the system, to improve how things are going. So design is still here embedded. And the last one, and talking about design, just a reminder, design is one of our pillars in Learn Analytics. I really love this paper. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it, by Professor Gacevich and colleagues as well, where he talked about the three pillars of our field, which is obviously data science, and we also have educational theory and sometimes other theories, but also design. That's so important. And so we would like to thank Kathy for bringing this conversation on design and applied framework to do design. Thank you.
So now I would like to pose a few questions to our panelists, and I will attempt to go back and forth a little bit so that we can get our panelists on the Zoom. My first question to Angela first is, how can human-centered design aimed at addressing equity issues for individuals with different ability levels help us achieve more trustworthy learning analytics? Getting to our conference theme.
All right, awesome. This is a great question. So thinking about these kind of human-centered design processes, as well as speaking a little bit to what was discussed in the last panel, I think that co-design and participatory design approaches are really quite key here. So by actively enlisting learners and teachers in the conception of our projects, in identifying what problems there are, in ideating solutions that actually work for their context. These are all key ways to support trustworthy learning analytics, because we're creating systems not only for learners and teachers, but by learners and teachers. One kind of note, though, thing that I want to highlight here is that in co-design processes, it's still very important to attend to what power dynamics might be at play. So power dynamics between researchers and participants, between teachers and students. And sometimes these kinds of power dynamics can be disruptive to having genuine conversations about what are problems in the classroom. So some ways to think about how we might consider power dynamics in these spaces are doing things like having multiple modalities for people to give responses to prompts about what problems there are. Maybe there are some ways for them to anonymously give responses. These are all ways to help ensure that everyone's voices and that the relevant voices are heard in this space.
Do we have other panelists who would like to respond to this question? Yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I can add something. I really like the idea of designing with the stakeholders, and that's something we do. However, I would like to bring also some practice that is emerging outside Learn Analytics, which is human-centered AI. And it's being promoted by several people. One of the main promoters is Ben Schneiderman, who is a professor in HCI. And he's been working about this word, trustworthiness. And given that is also the theme of our LAC 23, I think deserves like lots of conversations here in this panel and everywhere. One thing to differentiate I really like, I learned from human-computer interaction, is that trust is not the same as trustworthiness. Trust is potentially perceived trust that the users have on the system. And that doesn't mean that the system is trustworthy. So the system maybe is not trustworthy, but people trust on it. And we've been doing some experiments and interviews with users, and especially with multimodal data, which is very complex. And we always immediately see how teachers tend to trust too much on the system. And we're criticizing sometimes our own systems because we know that what they are thinking and the capabilities of the system go beyond what the system actually can do. So in human-centered AI, there is this concept of that we need to add independent oversight. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe someone in the audience knows, but I haven't seen that in Learn Analytics. So we sometimes ask the users if they trust the system, but can we find mechanisms to actually have independent oversight to really know if the system is trustworthy? And similarly to in other areas where we can find a label in a product, and that label can give us a little bit of certainty that we can trust on the system. And I feel like that would be a good, nice next step. And potentially universal design for learning to offer some mechanisms to design, thinking about people's needs. Maybe one way, but I think we're still going to need some kind of external mechanism to really make sure that those AI systems, analytic systems, even if it's just visualization, but like to really know with certainty if we can trust on those systems. So it's very interesting concept and question. Thank you.
Adele, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you so much. So I think you bring up a really good point about trust, where we really have to be considering are educators trusting the platform? Are we trusting the designers to create the right tool for children to learn or for other learners? And something that's really important in all of this is really considering the learning theory. I think a lot of research that is in the educational space is very focused on that AI and adaptivity side, and a little less is focused on the design. And the inputs that go into algorithms, so the inputs that go into this design are critical to really being able to create successful educational tools for students to learn. So if we want to consider, for example, different dynamic learning algorithms that consider different item difficulties, we have very concrete assumptions that go into these algorithms. And in order to trust a platform that is giving students math questions to answer, or literacy questions, or teaching them different content, we have to trust that this tool is actually having the right information and content to actually support learners. And that's why, for example, in my own research and in my own studies, I'm really looking forward to studying that learning science, seeing what is that neurological basis, what is the cognitive underlying reasoning that enables students to learn, and then how can we take that and put that into a learning tool. And then that's where I think, in my mind, the trust comes from. We're trusting the science that is defending this learning tool. And that's also why we're all here as researchers, to really continue developing that science and ensuring that everything has that research-backed methods. And then we can trust a tool and give it to students and be hopeful that it does have the research backing to actually help students learn.
I think my take on how human-centered design aimed at addressing equity issues can help achieve more trustworthy learning analytics. I think still I take it to the fact that taking a universal design approach will help us to ensure transparency in as far as the kind of tools we are actually developing, because if we take a human-centered approach, we assume that we are going to develop analytics tools that are going to be embedded within the actual needs and the interests or the needs of the people we are serving. And in that case, we bring in the aspect of urgency for the learners that are marginalized. And in that case, possibly we can end up with adaptable solutions that are not like a one-size-fits-all kind of tool for each and everybody. So taking this approach, I assume it's easier to ensure agency and adaptable solutions for the different learners, which possibly could help the whoever is using a system to feel maybe they can actually trust, or they can feel that whatever algorithm or whatever kind of output that is being produced is actually within the interests or is aligned with the needs of whoever is actually using it.
So you can keep the mic actually, although I should speak into this. I'll give the mic back to you. I'm going to read the next question. And let's see if I can just leave this up this way. Oops. So I can switch back and forth faster. So our next question is, what approach might you take when aiming to identify gaps in existing practices regarding inclusion and accessibility in the presentation of learning analytics for learners regardless of their ability or disability or background? And Rogers, I'll let you respond first to this one.
Thank you so much. I think how to identify, based on how to identify gaps in existing practices. I think this is a question to all of us as researchers in learning analytics at the moment. Let us look at what we are doing at the moment at our institutions in our research. We are developing so many tools, we are developing so many dashboards, we are trying to develop interventions that are even institutional based. But if we take a step back and say, okay, how inclusive are the systems we are having at the moment? I can say, as researchers, for example, taking that critical perspective on what we are doing and asking ourselves, okay, we have a dashboard at the university, we have an intervention at the university, but on what basis was this dashboard or system developed? And if we have a dashboard at an institution, who was involved in the process of developing this dashboard, and whose needs is this dashboard being serving, for example? I think taking this kind of a critical approach and looking at existing practices can help us to know, are we developing systems that are actually intended for the people who are, depending on who is being served and the intentions of the dashboard developed, the question is it equitable? Is it serving the different kind of stakeholders? Is it targeting only one particular kind of group? And there is also an aspect of how do we provide feedback, for example, based on the analytics we have. If we have a dashboard, how do we present the analytics back to the learners? We are talking about, for example, learners with disabilities or learners with different intellectual abilities. Do we present the analytics in a way that can actually address the needs or the capabilities of the different learners? I talked about the multimodal approach in the systems we're using in analytics. If we look at them, for example, if you are producing information in terms of visualizations or audio or video, can you actually provide enough modalities that can actually be used by the different kind of learners? There is also an aspect of, we talk about theory in learning analytics. We over talk about, okay, when we are developing analytics, we need to consider theory. But also there is something to do with, if you develop a dashboard, okay, based on theory, what kind of theoretical assumptions are we taking or that are informing the design of the tools we are developing? Okay, if I take a behaviorist approach, what kind of analytics am I going to produce? And if I produce this kind of analytics, are they actually in line with the different kind of learners we're actually serving? If you have students who are disabled students or students who are low performing versus high performing students, can you use one theoretical approach to design a tool or a dashboard that can actually address the needs of the different learners? Because we have different theoretical perspectives, and that means we learn differently, right? And that means even developing these analytic systems, we may not rely on only a single theoretical approach to develop the different features that inform our dashboards, but this could be a process of engaging different theoretical perspectives, behaviorists, cognitives. Can we actually embed, can we capture different features? In this case, I assume that it's easier to actually identify how the different systems and how the different approaches we're having at current institutions are serving the different learners, regardless of their background and regardless of their capabilities in terms of learning or even their geographical settings where they come from.
I'll go back to one of our online presenters, if one of you would like to speak to this.
Jump in. So I think that you mentioned a couple of really interesting points, one of which is we really have to consider who is actually using the learning tools that we're creating. So when we're creating learning tools, we're constantly in this sort of product iteration where we're looking at data that is coming into the tool and we're evaluating it. We're assessing how are students actually learning with this tool. Are we seeing good outcomes? And oftentimes we do actually have demographic data on students, but unfortunately it's not always analyzed or it's not always published. And I think that is a very critical aspect when we're talking about improving equity and inclusion in educational research. We often have this sort of data, but it's really important for us to actually look at it and see what to do next. For example, if we can analyze gender differences, we can analyze we can analyze all sorts of demographic differences, where people are coming from, low performing, high performing, and many of these other factors. And we can make conclusions from there and then see what sorts of students do we really need to help and support. And on the flip side, sometimes we may not have this data or we may not have a diverse data set. So then it is on the responsibility of researchers and developers of such learning tools to try to actually get their tool out to other students as well. We want to make sure that tools are reaching a diverse set of students so that we're not leaving behind students with disabilities or students with low performing backgrounds or any other minority group that is not being served in a wholesome level as some other students.
Angela?
Yeah, sure. I can hop in. So one thing that I wanted to add to this conversation is perhaps a little bit of a pushback on universality and this idea of being able to design in a universal way for a tool that fits all learners and everyone's needs. So in this quest for inclusion, yes, it is important that our tools are able to be used by everyone and whatnot. However, I think that it's also important to consider specific design for specific audiences and learners. So as an example, perhaps learners who are low vision or blind might need a particular technology designed with and for them to support them in their learning. Sorry, this is Penelope coming by with the cat. And so I think that it's very important that we not only think about universality, but also think about specificity in how we're being inclusive.
I think I'm going to move us. To our next question, and Roberto, I'll make sure to get you in the next one. So the next question, and this, Adele, is for you first. In what ways do you see the principles of the Universal Design for Learning framework usefully informing efforts to make learning analytics design processes and outputs more inclusive?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in here. So I think that with universal design of learning, as I mentioned before, it's very important for us to really consider UDL at the start. However, I think that UDL, if we only focus on it, is only going to bring us a certain way. As Angela just mentioned, I don't think it's possible for us to create a tool that really does support every single learner and is truly universal, because there are so many individual differences that we have to consider with learners. If we take students with physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and behavioral disabilities, they each have very unique and complex needs that we should be considering. However, I do really want to express how much I do value UDL and the framework. It, as Catherine showed earlier, there are these 3 areas of universal design of learning, and we can consider each one of these areas when we are thinking about creating a tool that does meet the learning needs of students with disabilities. And we can ask, how can we really make sure that students with behavioral disabilities are engaged in their learning? How does a student's behavioral disability impact how they are engaging? And then we can consider students with different physical disabilities that may also have unique needs when it comes to engagement. And then we can continue with these 2 other cycles of, or these 2 other aspects of UDL and ask those same questions. And answering these questions takes a very long time and it takes a lot of research, but it really is these interviews and observational studies that will help us better understand how we can apply the UDL framework to creating learning tools for a diverse set of users.
Thank you, Adele. Roberto, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm new to Universal Design for Learning, to the actual framework. We have been using universal design principles from the design areas. But I really love the idea of the framework because, as you saw in the first slide that Katie shared, it maps from even parts of the brain to educational processes and then actual design strategies to design for learning. However, I'm not sure if we can solve the equity problem from Learn Analytics, because even just thinking in terms of the educational system, sometimes it's really challenging to even build one unit, one course that is going to offer different opportunities to different students according to their particular needs or interests. So one example is in our faculty where we have units with 500, 700, 1,000 students, and all the time pressure is just making it impossible to have different learning tasks for each of them. So the question would be, how can we then design learn analytics tools on top of those learning tasks that already don't enable that multimodality or personalization? We can definitely aim for personalization. That has been one of the goals in Learn Analytics, and not only in Learn Analytics, but even before. The actual community was formed by AID, Artificial Intelligence in Education, Intelligent Tutoring Systems. Actually, Intelligent Tutoring Systems were aiming for personalization, and the approach was to constrain the learning task in order to provide that personalization. And however, that idea is now it's still there it's as a niche area of application in just some geographical area. So it is very challenging, but at least I think we need to really consider the lessons we can learn from design frameworks like UDL to make little changes and have at least the awareness that we need to do to make those changes. The UDL framework helped me to recognize practices that we have done that are not enough to address the whole problem, but at least contribute to equity. For example, when we design dashboards, we aim to use a color palette that is accessible for colorblind people. But there are so many different conditions, and not all the palettes cover all those conditions. So it's a problem that is challenging, but at least acknowledging that it's a weak problem and there are so many variables is already a good conversation to have, and especially a good food for thinking when we're designing. And the other example is more recent research. We realized that not all our teachers or students were reacting to data visualizations in the same way. And there is this this construct of visualization literacy, and there is InfoVis, which is the community of information visualization. They even have a test to measure visualization literacy, which is linked with data literacy, which is also in our language, in our conferences and our papers. We mentioned that we need to ramp up those abilities sometimes. But even doing research on that, and I was glad to see a poster, there was a review on that concept. it's important, and understand that, okay, not all dashboards can fit all, not all systems can fit all, but okay, let's go to the next step. So what can we do to design systems that can adapt, or at least recognize that if we introduce some scaffoldings to those dashboards, maybe they help, or actually maybe they don't help, but actually can affect students or teachers if they already have certain level of literacy. So it's an important problem to address.
I think I'll briefly comment that looking at the principles of universal design for learning, talking about representation, action and expression and engagement, I can see already we are seeing a kind of impact these kind of principles are having, for example, in the learning analytics field. And as Roberto and other speakers said, I think what's important is increasing this kind of awareness and sensitivity among the researchers and as a community. If we are already aware about the need to design for different kind of groups and needs, I think that alone is an important step, because I can say already having so many papers around human-centered design of learning analytics and seeing so many students working on this and papers being presented. We have had some special interest, special issues in the Journal of Learning Analytics just on the topic of human-centered learning analytics, and even some kind of special interest groups. I think this already is a sign that the principles of universal design are having some kind of impact on the way we do learning analytics, and that's why we are talking about it, and we are encouraging, okay, how best do we do it? I think it's a good starting point that we are recognizing and appreciating the fact that we need to design for everyone, or for people with different needs. The question is how practical it is. In practice, it's not very easy, but being sensitive and working around this, I think, is a good step forward, really.
So I think I'm going to move us to the next question, and Angela, I'll make sure that you're getting to the next one. Let's see. So as you look ahead to future learning analytics projects, what advice would you offer to improve our human-centered design practices around inclusion issues? And Roberto, I'll ask you to speak first.
Thank you. Wow, this is my favorite question. It is a complex question. There are so many things, so many challenges that are needed to really do good human-centered analytics research, and we're yet to see it. And one of the main challenges that I feel can be a call for arms to actually try to understand what we're designing for is how do we achieve the inclusion of underrepresented stakeholders. Let's just focus on the students. In several of our, and I just can talk about my own experience because I don't know how others have been working on this problem. It will be good to start to keep that conversation. And is that when we get participants in co-design, in human-centered design, participatory sessions, it's always the students obviously that are motivated, or students that have time. Even they don't need to be motivated. At least they have the time, they have that extra bit of resource to spend in those sessions. And unfortunately, those are not necessarily the underrepresented students most of the time, because the students that may be struggling the most are the ones that are going to have less time or less interest in participating. So that's potentially one of the main areas to address, how to do it in education. In other areas that are not education, maybe it's different. Maybe you identify the people much easily, and the communities, you go to the communities, and that's how co-design works in several parts of the world. You go to the communities, and they become the partners in the design process. In education is a slightly different phenomenon, because another point is that also the users or the participants are a moving target. If we co-design with students in, let's say, year 2 of of their career. We're not designing for them. Or well, we're not designing with them. The tool is not going to be for them. They are not going to use it because by the time the project is finished, they're gone. They are converted into year 3 students. They are doing something else. If you're talking about K-12, the same thing, development goes. So it's a moving target, and also something that was mentioned by Simon Buckingham-Shum before was as well the temporality is important. The educational system is evolving a lot. Because we're talking about also AI. AI evolves super rapidly, and next year is going to be completely different. So those are key challenges for human-centered design, and especially if we cannot even design for the generality that easily. So let's imagine how we're going to get to the point to design for underrepresented populations. So it's really an important problem. And it's really, really difficult to achieve. So I think forums like these are so much needed, and another potential area for future work, I would say, is the democratization of power structures. We don't have much design background in our community in general, I can say. I think we are getting lots of interest, and that's so good. We are getting interest in actually design, using the word and human-centered design. That's awesome. But to get to the point to actually let the users, if we say we're doing co-design, in co-design, if it's co-design, not necessarily human-centered design, but specifically co-design, power structures need to be very horizontal. So that means that where is the participant, in theory they need to make decisions, but it's really hard for us, especially as researchers, to lose the grip of, no, we're going to build this tool. And sometimes we still say, oh yeah, we're going to build a dashboard. That's already a decision. And who made that decision? And that sometimes doesn't enable us to think out of the box. And if we're talking about equity, or as my colleagues talk about also disability, just by making that commitment of a dashboard, we are just leaving out students, for sure, who are maybe are not going to be able to engage or even see visually whatever is in the dashboard. Or if we make design decisions, even at the level of the texts that it appears in that dashboard, is already also a strong design decision. There are so many things, and just looking at the interface is something that potentially we need to be looking more at that. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, thank you.
So Angela, we'll turn to you online here.
So I've got two kind of main pieces of advice or insight in this space. One is to think from an intersectional lens. That means that it's important to not just consider one potential aspect of a student's identity, so let's say their disability status, but consider how that intersects with other aspects of their identity, perhaps their race or their gender. All of these things work together and compound to influence a student's experience, a student's or a teacher's experience with these tools in classroom settings. And so we're perhaps not getting the appropriate depth of nuance in our design by only considering one aspect of identity at a time. And then the second kind of piece of advice that I have is that we as researchers need to consider and interrogate our own social context, what we consider to be quote unquote normal, as well as whatever biases that we have. So I'll give a specific example of that. I teach a class, and in this class, I'm often asking students questions, and I'm thinking about those students as being engaged if they talk back to me and if they answer those questions. And perhaps in a learning analytics system, we might have some sort of measure of how often students are talking as a proxy for whether or not they're engaged. But that perspective of whether or not students are engaged is coming from my perspective of, as an instructor, I want students to talk back to me, but maybe there are many other ways ways that students are engaged that are not showing up. Maybe they're thinking about the task on their own. Maybe they're taking notes or writing. There are all of these other ways that they might be engaged that don't fit into my social context and my definitions that I care about. And so because of that, I think that it's important for us to consider these multiple perspectives and multiple social contexts as we go into the design of learning analytics systems.
Thank you. So I'm noting our time and I'm wanting to open the floor to questions, both virtually or in person. We have Young here to monitor the chat or the Q&A in Whova. So if you're online and you'd like to pose a question to our panelists, please post it in the Q&A area on Whova. And if you're here and would like to pose a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring the double microphones around so that both the in-person people and the virtual folks can hear the question.
Thank you all speakers. It was very interesting talk about human-centered and universal design. My question is just more like a comment and trying to see your points of view. On the debate previously, we had the idea of where do we draw the line? What is the point where we are saying this is good for the majority and the minority is going to get affected? So in human-centered design, we kind of have the same point of decision. We have a group of students representing 1,000. So how big is the group big enough to say this is going to be good for the majority or not?
And I will say to our virtual presenters, if you want to speak, just unmute yourself, and I'm watching the Zoom as folks who are in person are responding, and we'll get you your responses as well.
Yeah, that's the question, right? Yeah, I think the educational system has its own challenges. And then we also have the AI challenges, AI-related challenges or analytics related challenges. I think this one is one of the educational challenges. Co-design works really well. I've seen several examples how it works in communities where the co-design team goes, but they are only facilitators, and the people are the ones that are going to eventually use the system. So the problem you are posing, that's the challenge. That's exactly what we were talking about in terms of it's not only the 1,000, it's the 1,000, it's the size, and it's the temporality. It's the students that are passing and going one after the other. So when we say we're doing user-centered design, is a big word. Is something that we need to be careful about it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it. We should. But that's the thing. What is the line where we say we are including everyone in the conversation? And that's the issue with the democracy is what happens with the minorities. And those are the kind of conversations we really need to have in human-centered learning analytics. We've been having four workshops on human-centered learning analytics. We haven't gone that deep yet. So that's exactly, I think we need this kind of conversation. We need PhD students to really think carefully about those issues because you guys are the future of the community. And so yeah, I don't have an answer about what is that line. What we are doing is the baby steps in that sense. We include as many students as we can with the resources we have, and hope that that's the representation, because the availability of students is a precious resource. But definitely we need to make a better job in identifying okay, who are we including? That's the question. I haven't seen anything in Learn Analytics, but in other areas. We need to learn from other areas. You don't need to reinvent the wheel.
I'd like to, I saw earlier that earlier, so.
Yes, I have one quick thing to add to this conversation. So often we position this argument as being, do we design in a way that is best for the majority or for minoritized students? However, I think that is perhaps a little bit of a false binary. So there is a lot of kind of prior research in this space that shows that when we do design for the most marginalized populations, in fact, those things that we learn from that design benefits everyone. And so through centering the most marginalized populations, we're still gaining insights and learning things that support all students. I'd like to point to Justin Reich's latest book called Failure to Disrupt, which talks about the ways that educational technologies, even when designed for the most marginalized students, still disproportionately support majority students in this space. And then I'll also give a concrete example of this. Whenever I am reading papers, I use accessible technologies and screen reader technologies that help me to read and summarize academic papers. And I do not have a visual impairment beyond wearing glasses. However, this technology still benefits me and helps me to be able to do my reading more productively and effectively. So I don't necessarily think we need to position this as what benefits majority and minority students, but instead kind of center marginalized voices and know that that is going to positively affect everyone.
Aware, like as researchers, that sometimes even the groups we want to involve in this process, some of them are actually not also aware of what they actually want. I mean, I've worked with teachers, for example, and you may assume that the teachers know what they want, but sometimes even when you go to them and ask them, what kind of analytics would you like, or what kind of, based on your needs, and some of them, they can't actually explicitly tell what they actually need, so that you use that to inform the design of whatever tools you are actually working with. And I think this will be the same thing. If you're working with marginalized groups of people, how much support can you actually provide to even find out what their needs are and how best to actually design the tools that will actually address the needs they have. So I think it's a lot of work in regard to data literacy and really identifying what the needs are. And coming to your question of how many we involve, if I come to an institution where you have very few students who come from a marginalized group, how do we actually capture their interest within the kind of tools we are designing? And I think that comes down to you as a researcher and the designers to know, okay, even though we have underrepresented groups, but if we are developing technologies, how best can we actually make sure that it's not just the needs? Because if you go with the needs of the stakeholders, you have 20 students coming from a particular background and one, that means you are going to design for the 20 versus the one. So it's about being aware. It's not just all the needs, but on top of the needs, consider what does maybe use the theoretical consideration and all these other different principles from human-computer interaction and all the needs, and we make sure that possibly what we design in the end will actually will be applicable and usable by different groups of people.
So Adele, are you able to respond briefly where you are at this point, or? Oh, sorry, let me unmute you.
I just want to leave us off on going back to, thank you. I think I just want to bring us back to the universal design of learning, and really let's consider where it originated from. So if you look at the framework, there's three really important aspects to it, and it connects to neuroscience. We want to think about the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. And this all touches different parts of a human brain. So when we're creating educational tools or when we're creating curriculums and teaching strategies for students, we want to consider the how, the what, and the why. And we can ask ourselves if the answers to these questions are different for different groups of students. So going back to the question of where do we draw the line, we draw the line after we have asked these questions and really consider that why, what, and how aspect for all different groups of students. And if the answer brings us to the same results, then we don't need to increase the individualization and the personalization. But if we start realizing that the answers to some of these questions can be different, then that's when we need to further explore and push the tool and the technology to really see how we can further improve learning for different groups of students.
So I think I'm noting that we're out of time at this point, I believe. So I want to thank our panelists for a really wonderful and interesting discussion today.